From the website Polyhaven and the HDRI section, we can find tons of backgrounds that we can use to light up our scenes and also provide textures to use in our scenes, such as the ground textures. I'm going to look for a specific HDRI, dry field, this one, and I'm going to download that. There are many HDRIs to use. Some of them are indoors, some of them are outdoors. They've got different nights and day scenes. Very interesting. So, once we've got those, we want to use them to full effect. There is an add-on that I've been working on at github.com/dreamspoon, OLumination. Currently it's on release 0.5, so I would download that zip file. Then in Blender, I go to my Edit and Preferences, Add-ons, Install, and I would choose that file that I had just downloaded, version 0.5. I've already got it installed, so I'll skip that part. Let's see where it is. After downloading, we can enable it. Version 0.5 is what I'm working with. Now that we have our HDRI background, and also we have our add-on downloaded and installed, there's a section in the add-on called World Envo. It might change in future version. To use it, first select the main camera in the scene, and then click Mobile Background. It's a good idea to reset the camera to the origin. For this next part, we'll see how it looks. We need to plug in the HDRI. We can do that simply this way. There's our dry field image. Open that. It updates. Everything looks like normal, at least for an HDRI anyway. We go to our camera view. We can rotate our camera up and we can rotate it around. But if we try and do motion, now we have something. Usually in HDRIs we wouldn't have that. We can move around within our HDRI, up and down, and you can see how the effect is accomplished, the warping. We can make it look like we are moving downwards, and we can zoom in towards the floor, or we can make it look like we're moving up and zoom away from the floor. Now let's bring back that box. If we want to allow the camera to move around in a larger space and still control the background properly, we'll need to go to our material, our world material. And when we use mobile, I should have mentioned this, when we use OLumin mobile background, it will delete all the old nodes and replace them with the new OLumination mobile background nodes. Something to keep in mind. Remember to save before you use this, and if you want to keep the same nodes, you could, for example, have them all selected. You can copy them with Control-C, then go to an object like your cube, put an extra material on it, just so you can have a temp. We'll call this World Temp. Delete out all the current nodes in World Temp, paste in with Control-V all of the old nodes, and that's how you save your world setup. You can save it to any material, but you have to have an object selected like a mesh to do it. Going back to our world material, if I just delete out some of these to show you what happens, move some around, if I hit mobile background, they're all back to the way it was originally. So I'm going to choose my dry field again. That is going to be my background. However, I want it to move around less when I move the camera. When I move the camera a little bit up and down, it should move just a little bit. So I will go to the mapping node. There's a mapping node that has a driver as an input. And we can use that and add a location, do a rotation, or do a scaling. So I will use 0.01 just to demonstrate. That's the slow way. I could have clicked on the top box, dragged down, fill the 3 boxes, then type in 0.005 as an example. Let's see what happens. I can move up many meters, and no problem. I'm at 10 meters. The camera's 10 meters off the ground now. Let's go down minus 10 meters. Now we're getting closer to the ground, but we're still not right at it. Let's look down. There we go. Let's add the next piece, which is the cube, and we're going to add a texture to it, a special texture. With Illumin, we can add XYZ to UVW. We're going to choose for our color a environment texture and click XYZ to UVW. Well, first we're going to select material, delete our temporary material. We're going to delete out that old material. XYZ to UVW with the default options is going to add a new material. Let's see what that is. It is a pink material because it doesn't have a texture color. Let's use the same texture we had already loaded quickly, the EXR, to see what it looks like. That looks kind of strange from the outside. Let's delete just the faces on the top and see what happens. I think we can do better than that. Now the reason for doing this will become more apparent because we can use a different way to simulate shadows. We can also use something called a shadow catcher. And one thing I forgot to do. I need to go to the font modifiers, turn on the 2 UV project maps. As long as I'm editing it and I want it to keep updating the texture, I'll have to keep those maps available. Let's take a better look at that. So what have we just done? We have a hard to see something. So going to the object, add a shader, I'm going to add a color hue saturation node between the principled BSDF, which I'm going to change specular down to 0. I'm going to change roughness down to 0 as well. And with my hue saturation node, I will increase the value to 2, which will brighten up the ground a whole lot. Let's see how it looks more towards the horizon. If I hide it, that's what it should look like. Bring it back, up the value some more. Five seems to be very close to the actual. And here we can start to see something interesting. The HDRI is attached to the plane as a big texture. But it's very stretched out the further away you go from the camera. However, as long as we get close to the camera, everything looks fine. What we can do to make the background look better was that mobile background option. We can go up and down, and the plane looks a little bit wrong, but the background moves a bit with us as we go up and down. Problem is, our plane needs to blend into the background because it's not doing that right now. Let's look at the shader and add something extra. We're going to use the input geometry info. a vector and a converter vector math that is set to distance. Our distance could be from where the light strikes the plane to the origin, which is currently where our camera's at. And then using that, we can get, let's just see it for a moment. It looks very, very bright. We're going to have to do some math to bring that number down. Let's multiply the distance by 0.001. Now when we look at our plane from far away, clipping error. When we look at our plane from far away, we can see that we have a gradient. Great. And the gradient is based on distance. Use a color ramp node together with a transparency node by way of a mix shader. Our distance with our multiplier and our color ramp will adjust how far into the transparency we go. So if we bring our original shader back, now when we look at it with clipping fixed somehow, and 10,000, and start at 1. Now we can see a little bit of a problem in Eevee. We've got a transparency near the edges, but because we haven't enabled it on our material settings, because we have to go to blend mode and alpha blend, wait for the update. Now there's a lot of transparency. In fact, it's mostly transparent. Too much transparency. Let's use our color ramp node to adjust that a bit. There. Push it back a bit. Oh, that looks good. Now going back into our camera mode, everything looks a little bit different. A bit. Let's adjust this over even more. How far back do we set it? Like this? That's not quite right. Let me try that again. This does it. Here we go. Fade out. And the fade is not quite right. I think I've got the camera in a weird position. Bring it back to 0. Now everything seems to fade correctly. You can see the border now. And if I come out, I have what looks like an overlay on our HDRI. And check this out. As I move the camera up and down, it warps it in a funny way. This is the effect of mobile background. But when you're actually in the camera mode and you go up and down, it kind of helps simulate moving up and down. Now we need to match it up a bit better. So I'm going to purposely put it in a wrong area where I can see doubling. I can see that this Y should be up. So what I'm going to do is now go to my world background. And now that I have examples, I can properly set the scale. I press home to go to show all nodes. Look at my scaling, look at my mapping node and look at the scaling on it, and then adjust the scaling while looking at the background. I can adjust all three at the same time. Wrong way. There's actually only one variable we need to adjust, and that's the Z value, because we're moving up and down. So if we press the Shift key while we move it, we can see where we are getting closer and further. Ah, that's very close. Let's transfer that number to all the rest. Now when we move the camera up and down, it much more closely follows the background. You can see what a difference just a very small change in the mobile background scale can make. When we're going up, I'm now up 4 meters from the original HDRI camera position. If I look at it, so here we can move our camera up and down and see the effect. It scrolls and the background looks a little bit weird. Here we can get almost right down to the ground and it looks like the trees are still working. It looks like the trees are so far away, and when I move up, it feels like I'm moving. It almost feels like the trees are moving, even though it's just a fake effect by warping the background. It feels like we're moving up and down, and it feels like that background is far away. That's the effect of mobile background. And using XYZ to UVW with an environment texture on some geometry. A plane, a simple plane. That's all you need. Now that we can move our camera around, we can even move it around in the X direction, the Y direction, rotate it around. You might say, why would we do all this? Because we could just use a shadow catcher. Let's see how much better the shadows are with this option. I'm going to add a cube as just a simple example and blocking the camera, of course, by default, but we can already see some of the details. That's pretty nice. I'm going to just change that over to a sun, bring the light down a bit. Now we can see how nice and sharp the shadows look when it is actual geometry, even though it has some transparency applied to it. And if we move our shadow object out to the transparent areas, it still carries its shadow correctly. Fades off into the distance, and the shadow will disappear. Let's see how that goes. Shadow in, shadow out. Shadow in, shadow out. Testing our cube with the camera in place. We can bring it close. Let's see how sharply defined the shadows look now, compared to if we use a shadow catcher, which is another way to use this plane, and still see the HDRI. In Cycles, there's the option of using an object as a shadow catcher. And you can have the object basically disappear, and if we ignore the transparency, set as principled, our object will catch shadows without the need for an environment texture setup. All we need is we don't even need the transparency, actually. If you look at it that way, a shadow catcher makes it so you don't even need a texture. But if we go to Eevee, we can't use the shadow catcher option. It does not exist. So we have to use So in Eevee, we need to find some other solution, and this seems to work pretty well. We have what looks like nice shadows, nice crisp clear shadows, without needing a shadow catcher and using very little geometry. If you like this sort of video and want to learn more, then hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you want to know when more videos come out. Thanks!